So Sue, as Area Education Officer for South East, how do you think Provision Management 2.0 will help schools take a more strategic approach to inclusion and support for children and young people with special educational needs?
Surrey's vision is every child and young person will be safe, healthy, creative and have the personal confidence, skills and opportunities to contribute and achieve more than they thought possible. Our schools educate our children, including those who are vulnerable, in order to ensure they achieve the best they can. We know that Surrey, when benchmarked against other councils, has one of the highest numbers of children with statements. This is not sustainable in the light of new legislation and the additional resources devolved directly to schools. Our approach is to enable our schools to be better at inclusion, meet the additional needs of that cohort, and be able to describe this in their school offer, which will then be part of the local offer.
Without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Anita Devi, who is a consultant, a very, very experienced consultant at both local level and national level, has significant experience in special educational needs on the shop floor and at local authority level. And I'm very pleased that Surrey have brought her in to do this part of this training. As I said, she's been working in Surrey on this for the last 10 months or so, so it isn't a case of just being dropped into this training. It's something that we're trying to embed in our process throughout all systems. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Anita.
Okay, this is actually day 7 of 8 days that we're rolling out across the county, and it is a training model. So what we're going to do is give you the skills and tools and the knowledge to go back to your settings and share this in cascades with colleagues in your settings. All the materials relating to this are up on a website, and I'll explain that as we go through. Okay, I'm not actually from Surrey, so I'm from Milton Keynes, and I was up in Woburn Abbey in June, and I travel a lot by train, and I came across this beautiful cross-stitch, and I was just amazed about how much effort had gone into it. But for me, it was also a question of ticking off all the stations I'd been to, because Surrey's quite an interesting place to get around on train. But it just shows how broad and the county is. In the summer of this year, the director of the London SEN Strategy Group and Challenge Partners released a video called 10 Characteristics of Effective Provision. I thought it would be a good way to just start the training. particularly stand out for you on the video? Would you agree with it? Would you say it's what good practice looks like now? Well, that's what good practice is going to look like going forward in the new world. So it's that our principles of what we do aren't really going to change. Possibly the way we do it will change, and this is the time when we need to start thinking about that. We've had the indicative SEN Code of Practice out, and the draft Code of Practice is expected out on the 1st of November for consultation. And that will go hand in hand with the Children and Families Bill through the Houses for Royal Assent in Easter. This is the timeline that we're on, and for sign-off, basically, in the summer, and for implementation from, and I use the word from, September 2014. So we're going to need to start thinking about how do we upskill staff around the Code of Practice? How do we inform them? Because is the Code of Practice just for SENCOs? Who should be adhering to the Code of Practice? Well, all teachers, so it's for everyone, and they all need to know about what the new Code of Practice is. And this video, which is open on the Vimeo, is a good way of actually beginning to sow seeds and do that drip feed back in school to start getting us talking around what does effective SEN provision look like in our school and how do we know. So what's today's training about? There are 5 main aims that we hope to cover in this training. We're going to look at the full range of materials that have been developed to support you, go back to your settings and deliver this training and develop the systems and put those into place. We are aware that some of you already have provision management or provision mapping systems in place. Do we have people who've got provision maps in place? Yeah? A few. Okay. What we're not saying is throw out the baby with the bathwater. What we've developed is a criteria list for evaluating your current system. So it's kind of saying, well, what have we got in place already? Let's look at that. Let's measure it against this criteria and keep the bits that we know that are working well. And the things that we need to develop, let's build that into a strategic plan. So that's going to be part of the meeting as well. It would just be helpful to know how many primary colleagues do we have here today? Secondary? Unique. And alternative provision, early years? Okay. There are examples of primary and secondary materials on the site. So I will try and bring in a blend of that, but if you have any questions, kind of say, well, in a secondary context, what would we do? It's fine. It will work across all phases. We're going to look at how do you take this back, okay? Because sometimes we can go on trainings and think, yeah, great, we want to use this. What's a great, effective way of taking this back to our schools? And I use the model of appreciative inquiry, which is an organisational change model. Starts with a very positive call, and actually maps really well onto the school improvement cycle. And we'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to also think about, well, how does this all fit in to the future and the world we're moving into? And how does the work that we're doing here form the basis for future applications for education healthcare plans? And finally, we're going to look at what you need to do in the next couple of months to define your school offer part of the local offer. Okay, so quite a full agenda. In terms of your handouts, okay, you should have in your packs okay, you'll have a strategic pathway sheet. There is a checklist criteria sheet. Then I think 3 pages of document overview. Okay. These provide you a list of all the documents that have been created to support this. Okay. And the latest version has a QR code on it. So actually, if you're into scanning those, and it will take you directly to the website where it is, and I'll explain a bit about that later. And then there's a timeline, an evaluation form, and a login. Okay? If we get some time as we go through the materials, and you've brought some, I know some of you have brought your own devices, we'll see if we can actually log onto the site and actually go through some of the materials as well. Okay. Are we okay with the handouts? There are a lot of handouts that have been created. Things like FAQs, so that you can go back to staff and say, well, what is provision management? What is the local offer? Do you want to talk to parents? There are slides, the trainer slides, all these slides are on the web portal, as are some draft slides to support your CPD. You can take those, put your own logos, personalise it, go back to school and say, here's what I created earlier. That's fine. They are all there for you to use. They're copyrighted to Surrey, but they are designed for you to go back and use within the school context. You can download them off the website and actually upload them onto your own system, and that's fine too. Okay, so they are designed for that purpose. Okay, so here, Provision Management 2.0. We're into the next generation of provision management. Okay? Because in the new world, we're going to have to use it and look at it slightly differently. So what it is not is new software. Okay? I'm not here to promote any software. There are lots of models out there. There are some Excel spreadsheet models that came out of the SEN toolkit. I know there's the Babcock toolkit, and there is Blue Mountains have got provision mapping software. There is lots out there. That's not what we're here to talk about today. It's about actually how we put the systems and structures around whatever we use to make it effective. There is not a fixed way of doing things. Okay? The whole programme is a very flexible approach. It is more descriptive than prescriptive. So we'll give you, these are the principles and the things that you need to achieve. How you do it will depend on the ethos of your school, where your school is on your school journey, how big your school is. A provision map and the way you do it will be very different for a small school in a small village compared to a large comprehensive in a town. You know your schools, you know your children, you know your community, and the provision map is most effective when it is designed to be effective in the community. Okay? So if it is a pen and paper version at the end of the day, and that's what you're using, that's fine, as long as it works. IEPs were never mandatory in the Code of Practice. The content of them is. But the best IEPs, when you go for a review, are the ones that have got scribbling all over them, have been highlighted, have got the odd coffee mark, because they reflect a working document. Provision maps have the same kind of approach. They are working documents. If, as a local authority, we gave out templates and said, fill this in, what do you think might happen? If we said, here's a provision map, please fill this in, what might happen?
I reckon it would just be a paper exercise.
It will be a paper exercise, and once you filled it in and possibly sent it back to local authority, where would you put it then?
File it.
File it. And would it be used? Who would fill it in, do you reckon? Who would be most likely to fill it in? Oh, there's a few. The SENCO or the senior leadership team. Would the school, the rest of the staff, would parents, anyone else have access? Would it really be a working document? No. And that's why we've not provided, this is what a provision map looks like. We've got some examples there. Some of the examples are very good. They're ones that I've collected on the way. And some of them are not. And there is an activity there which you can do with staff to say, let's look at these examples, there's about 15. And let's think about which bits of this we like and which ones we don't, because they're not always effectively done. So you need to design what would work for you in a school and why have you got a provision map and how you're going to use it. That is critical. There is no point having a provision map for the sake of it. It's got to be usable within your own context. It is a bottom-up approach that Surrey has adopted. And the rationale behind that, again, if we were to come and say, all schools must do this for children with dyslexia, all schools must do this for children with ASD, okay? This is what we expect for every school to do. What might be some of the challenges of that approach? Would you be happy for the authority to come along and say that to you?
The individual, aren't they? Some more money. So it's not one size fits all.
Right, so that would be a one-size-fits-all model, absolutely. And
Well, so they're all individuals, aren't they?
the children are individuals, and so are the schools and the communities, and it's about actually matching that. But also from a parent perspective, if I actually had a child in the Surrey school, and my child had, let's say, dyslexia, and all schools were meant to have this provision, and I truly believed, for whatever reason, my current child's school wasn't providing for their needs, what would be my reaction? Every school is like this. This school isn't providing. What would I then want? What would I then see? Different school, different provision, probably out of county. Yeah? So that's the rationale why we haven't gone through saying every school must do this. What we're saying is, tell us what you do, tell us what you do well. and let's build on that. Let's look at capacity building. And in authorities where this approach has been taken, it actually helps to look at how funds are used beyond just putting children in different placements. So for an example, in one school, in one authority, we had 2 children who had, from the same family, had medical needs. Academically and socially able to go into mainstream, but their medical needs could have warranted a medical school. They were quite severe and they did need specific feeding times and medication times. The local authority made the decision to actually, over the summer, change one of the secondary, the mainstream secondary they wanted to go, change one of their small rooms into a medical room. That investment would live beyond the life of those children being at the school. Okay? It was capacity building in the school, and it actually cost less. So from a cost point of view, it cost less, but it also met the children's needs, which was much more important. They were able to stay with their peers, get the academic challenge they needed, the social needs that they had, and their medical needs were met. So the new world we're moving into is going to encourage us to look at resources differently, to look at the way we use resources and the way we meet children's needs differently. And that's what this is partly about as well. Provision management is evolving, so you can't say, yeah, we've done it, tick the box, file it, and put it away. It's an ongoing process, it's an ongoing dialogue. And as I said, it is a way of doing things differently. Okay, so the journey. I hope you're all still here with this, and if you think you're at the wrong course, then this is the time to probably leave. We did, I don't know if any of you are here, we did one course in Sutton. This was for a national programme. And true story, we had someone, there was an AA course going on next door for people who had had driving offences. And 1 or 2 of them came and sat in on the course, and it was about half an hour in, they suddenly realised they're not actually in the right place. So I've learned to always ask. The journey. Hopefully you're here today with someone else from your school. I presume some of you, just by the way you're interacting, you're here with senior leaders. Some of you may have come on your own. If you've come on your own, please go back and talk to a senior leader, because it is a whole school approach, and it is really important that you kind of get someone on your side to work with this through, with you. We're hoping that at the end of this training you will have the tools and the knowledge to go back and facilitate a dialogue in your own settings, and from that we will gain clarity on the provision within each setting that is additional and different from. That phrase, additional and different from, where does it come from? Where does it come from? It's the SEN Code of Practice, and it reflects provision for children with special educational needs. That isn't changing in the world going forward. If you read the legislation drafts that have come out, that phrase has remained, additional and different from. So if we are to define what's additional and different from, it really is important that we know what the baseline is to start with. What is our whole school baseline that we offer every child who walks through the door? What is it we do for every single child, and how do we know it's effective? So can we think of some examples that we do for every child who walks through the door?
Differentiate the learning.
Differentiate their learning. Okay, we'll come back onto differentiation because that's quite a big topic in itself. But yeah, I can hear that. Anything else?
Set targets.
Set targets. So there's progress reviews, regular progress reviews. Okay. Assessment kind of links into that. So formative and summative, kind of developing that assessment for learning process. Yeah. What else?
Safe environment.
Safe environment. Say some more. What makes it a safe environment?
That they're not in fear of being challenged in a way that they can't actually meet, or in fear of other children, or in fear of failure. And also health and safety in terms of they can actually get around the school.
Right, so there's a physical environment aspect.
Yeah.
There is a kind of emotional aspect for what I'm hearing. So it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fail because we can learn from that. And it's okay to go and talk to someone if you've got a problem. Okay? Does it? Yeah. What else? Okay, we've got a lot of primary colleagues in the room. So, do you have visual timetables? Is that for every child? Just
Yes.
Do you have carpets on the floor in your classrooms? If you take anyone ever taught in a classroom where you don't have carpets, and you've got a child who's got a hearing aid,
Yeah.
incredibly difficult, isn't it? So So actually, we've got carpets in now, and they support children who've got hearing difficulties.
But not children who've got asthma.
No, and that can be a challenge as well. What about if we took away the structure of our day in the school? Would some children not cope with that? Right. So our structures and routines are also supporting that inclusive environment. Do we have equipment on the playground that's for unstructured times? Or maybe rules around football days, non-football days, so that we can actually encourage much more interaction? Do we have friendly staff? Oh, there's a bit of are the children greeted by friendly staff, caring staff? Yes. Isn't that part of our wave one? Okay. Let's just take a few moments. Share on your table 3 things that you do for every child who walks through your door. Anyone willing to share some things that have come up that this is what you do for every child who walks through the door? Anything you've shared, or were you all off task? Building relationships with parents. Okay, yeah. What else?
Make them feel loved and valued.
Making them feel loved and valued. Okay, and that supports their aspirations. Yeah. Okay.
Listen to them.
They are listened to. Okay, so there is a listening culture and environment. Okay, and how is that? I mean, how do you do that? Do they have a named key person that they go to, or?
No, they don't at the moment, but yes, me basically.
Right. Okay. I mean, I've taught early years primary and secondary. One of the things with primary is, you always do the register in the morning. That happens in secondary when you're tutoring as well, and they want to come and tell you their news of last night, or the parrot died this morning, or mum's suddenly got out. One of the things I've used in primary is, do you use bubble time at all? Yeah. Can you come and use bubble time? So I used to have this visual on in my wall, and if they needed to talk to me and it was urgent, they would just take a peg which had a number on it, didn't have their name. They had a numbered peg, and they would click it onto that visual. And it was their way of telling me, I have something going on in my life that's really urgent that I need to talk to you. And it would help me then set the independent work, and actually give them that time. And everyone in the class knew that when I was talking to that one-to-one, it was individual, they couldn't interrupt. But it also supported in the independent working time, peer-to-peer support in learning. Because you can be overloaded sometimes, it's about managing those relationships. Okay, so listening environment, what else? What else? There's lots of murmuring going on, so there's lots of ideas. Secondary colleagues, what?
We thought school provides a safe community, a place that people hands up and feel.
A sense of identity, yep. Okay.
And an exciting and multi-sensory academic journey.
Right, yep. So a multi-sensory, I like that. And it is a journey, yeah, okay. Some of you might be sitting here thinking, yeah, we do all of that, but that's just what good teaching is about. That's what we do as quality first, so why am I making a big deal of it? That's the baseline. And if we go back to school and we talk about, yeah, we all want quality first teaching and learning. What does that mean? What does that look like in practice? That becomes our baseline. So those of you who said you've got provision maps, how many of you have got wave one? A wave one provision map? Where you actually start explicitly saying, this is what we do. Do children and young people have access to size-appropriate furniture and resources? Yeah. Can you imagine if you had dyspraxia and you had an imbalance in your shoulders or your hips, and you sit on a chair and your feet don't touch the ground? Your handwriting, your child's handwriting is going to be affected. So we have age-appropriate access to materials. Primary colleagues, do we have things labelled, signposted? And in secondary, we probably have different multi-language signs. It's part of the environment, but does that help every child? How many children actually sometimes get their cues of moving around the building because of some of that? Okay. It's all contributing to their learning. And I think the one thing we are very good at doing that as a profession, we're not good at actually saying and sharing that with parents. But this is what we do for every child who walks through the door. Why does it become important? Some of you may be aspiring to have dyslexia-friendly classrooms as part of your wave one, or ASD-friendly classrooms. If a parent walks in and says, my child has got dyslexia, we went online last night and we did a test, and that test tells us he's got dyslexia. What are you doing for my child? The very first thing we can say is, here's our Wave 1 provision map. This is what we do for every child. And in that are a number of strategies that say we are a dyslexia-friendly classroom environment. But on top of that, we recognise Sam, John, Paula, whoever the child is, has additional needs, and they are getting this in Wave 2 at least once a week. How do you think that parents will feel? How do you think that reassured? And that conversation is going to take a very different turn from being confrontational, what are you doing for my child, to actually amazement. I've been a SENCO in school, and I've worked in some very tough areas, and I've had some parents walk through the room, through the door, who were ready to hit my head, you know, because they were convinced their child had everything under the sun and we weren't doing anything. The minute I took out the Wave 1 provision map and said to them, this is what we do for every child, and it was a lot because we had put everything on there, they suddenly began to realise this is an environment where my child's needs are being met.
If you were giving Wave 2 support to a child with dyslexia, would you already have engaged in a conversation with the parent to let them know that was happening?
You would hope so, and I would hope so, and that's good practice. And yes, I would hope you've got to that point. I have, as an advisory teacher, though, been called into meetings where actually the school were applying for statutory, and up until that point they've never been consulted. So there is a mixture of practice out there. But as a point of good practice, before it gets to the point of Wave 2, if parents are aware that this is what we do as Wave 1 for every child, and this is what our teaching and learning policy looks like in practice, so that gap between policy and practice is bridged, what really explicitly, I think it is reassuring, as we said earlier, but it also gives parents confidence around what kind of strategies they could be using at home. It doesn't always have to be additional and different from. And that dyslexia is actually a particular one because, and you know, psychology colleagues do challenge me on this, you know, but most local authorities use the BPS 1999 definition of dyslexia, which is about word and text level. Okay, and so we use that all the way through because we talk about making those reasonable adjustments in the classroom. When they get to FE or HE, they suddenly need an assessment and a disability kind of sometimes label that goes with that. So there are some challenges in the system, but within schools there are a number of things that are being done that do make it a dyslexia-friendly classroom and meet the child's needs. And parents don't realise that because we're just doing it automatically. It's part of what we do. So I think it's about us being explicit what we do as a baseline for parents then to recognise what it is we do that is additional. This is beginning to make sense. This is taking into place. Okay. So the new world is very much about being transparent about what we are doing at different levels. The cost of that will come into this at some point, but more importantly, the impact, the expected outcomes, and the actual outcomes. So Provision Management 2.0 looks at three aspects. Okay? We look at the process. How are the provision maps created? How is the provision management system put together? Is there a whole school approach? Does it align to the school improvement cycle? The new Ofsted framework 2012 and the revisions that were done in the summer very clearly puts SEN as part of the whole school. It's no longer a bolt-on, it's no longer on the periphery. So how are we aligning our strategy in SEN to the whole school improvement cycle? The second aspect is the system. In schools we collect, I think, a significant amount of data. And sometimes we duplicate. We've got different people collecting the same amount of data, the same data in different places. Are we aware and have a full understanding of what data is being collected and how we're using that data? As I said, IEPs were never mandatory, but the information on them was. So if we were doing a Wave 2 or a Wave 3 intervention, we do need to know what's their entry data, what's their starting point at before the intervention is put in place, what's their exit data. So you've had 6 weeks of an intervention, how is that shifted on? And that can be for phonics, but it can also be for behaviour. So for example, if you've got a child who's calling out 30 times in a 45-minute lesson, that's their entry data. How many times are they doing it at the end of 6 weeks? But alongside that needs to come the attendance. Because actually, if you've had a 6-week intervention and they've made no progress, is it because the intervention was wrong? Is it because we've identified the wrong target? Or actually, have they not just been in school? So that's the data we need to start thinking about. How are we using that combination of data to inform our practice around children's needs and our identification of them? And the last bit, what's the output? Provision management is more than just a provision map. It's a multi-layered system, an integrated multi-layered system where you'll have breadth and depth of maps for different purposes and different uses. There'll be whole school maps. There will be individual maps, group maps, sometimes subject-based maps, particularly in a secondary, phase maps. So it's about how do we use all those different parts and integrate those into a system that works for us. If I was in school now as a senior leader, I would definitely be publishing our Wave 1 on our website. If this is what I'm saying that we do for every school, every child in our school, why shouldn't we let the parents know? Why shouldn't we actually do that? And I think the pupil premium has certainly helped us to become better at saying what provision we are investing in, how much we're spending on it, and what we expect the impact to be. So I think the strategies and tools are in place to do that. What we need to do is get better at that next year. So let's just clarify terms. Now, as we move into the new world, there'll be a whole new raft of terminology and language. And in some schools, we have encouraged them to put up a new SEN vocabulary board, just to kind of, again, upskill staff. And this is the new word. EHCP plans, they are going to replace statements. What does that mean? Let's start educating the workforce. So on the e-materials, there is a glossary around the Pathfinder from Southampton. Southampton, like Surrey, are part of the SE7, and they've developed a really good glossary, so I've included that on the materials. But I think there are 3 that we need to think about for today's training. The DFE defined provision mapping as something that takes into account the full scope of provision, including high-quality whole-class teaching, guided and group work, individual interventions, in order to identify and overcome potential barriers to learning and to meet the needs of all pupils within and beyond the school setting. That is actually one sentence on their website. There are some examples that the DFE have on their website, and they have a particular model there. Their model is very based around individual ideas. It's not a whole system approach, but they do ask some very good reflective questions, and those materials have been included. But the model is quite flat. It is about provision mapping as opposed to provision management. Provision management takes it to a strategic level. So it's a strategic integrated system of multi-layered maps for different purposes that interfaces with the school improvement cycle. I cannot stress that enough. It really is about interfacing with that. And, it's good to see some of the senior leaders here all nodding, because actually, once it links into that, it becomes part of the learning process. And this provision management system provides governors, trustees, senior leaders, staff and families with relevant data about what the school offers and how effective it is. So what's on offer, what's available? Where there are gaps in provision, so what needs to be developed? Where can we capacity build? And that would be really helpful for the local authority officers to know this is an area for capacity building. And an analysis of cost and impact for individuals as well as groups of learners. In the new world, in some areas, we will be moving into personal budgets and parents actually managing those budgets. And actually, we need to be aware of actually how we present those information to them and share that information with them. And finally, the local offer. I think we've heard this term branded about quite a bit since the SEND paper came out. Quite basically, it's an online portal. It's a database of all services that will be available for all children, 0 to 25, public, private and voluntary sector, across education, health and social care. That's what it is. Surrey, I think we're looking at around 9,000 entries there will be, including schools, on the portal. So it's not something that can be published in a booklet form, it will be online. Now that in itself will bring a number of challenges for families who don't have access maybe to online resources or who have literacy difficulties of their own. And those are challenges we're going to need to face. But what does the local offer mean for schools? And just so to summarise, the 4 areas the provision and management system really needs to take into account is availability, cost, the quality, so how the intervention's monitored. We do a lot of good monitoring at wave 1. Wave 2 and 3, do we monitor the interventions we're using? Do we observe colleagues as they're delivering wave 2 and 3? When we have external partners who walk in and deliver an intervention, how is that being monitored? How is that being looked at in terms of quality assurance? Because if we're buying in more and more and commissioning, how good are we getting at commissioning what we want and knowing exactly whether this is what's being delivered? In another authority I've worked in, so it's not Surrey, but I worked with a secondary school, and they've been buying in specialist teachers 1 afternoon a week for a year. So that's quite a hefty bill. And actually it hadn't resulted in capacity building within the school, but there'd been generated a number of reports, individual children's reports. And when I went through the reports, I was quite amazed to see the wrong names on reports, that reports were undated, and actually the strategies weren't really tight. And if there was a child amongst the sample that I saw that had to go to panel at some point, that would never support constructive evidence. So we've got to be clear what evidence we want from our external partners. How do we want them to deliver? And we shouldn't be afraid to ask them. I know there are specialists coming in, and they're coming in to add value. But I was an advisory teacher once, and if a school came and said to me, this is what we want you to do, this is what we do already, this is our provision now, this is what we've done already, this is what we do on a regular basis. What are you going to add to that? That would be a realistic expectation. And that's a different way of working. We're not used to kind of saying often to colleagues who are coming in, this is what we've done already, we want something different, we want something, and this is how we'll measure it. So we're going to need to think around some of those issues. So just to kind of take you back through the journey, the historical journey, obviously the coalition came into office in 2010, and by March 2011 they had issued the Green Paper. And in that was 52 questions for consultation. 74% of those who responded said that the local office should make it clear what support's available for children and young people. They wanted comprehensive information, and they wanted to be specific to each local authority. About 30% said they wanted a local authority contact, 22% suggested a parental group contact, and only 12% thought it should have some national context. So based on that, when they published their findings 18 months later, the next steps, the DFE, the government, defined that the local offer will include the core provision for all children birth to 25, and that will include a special education provision that is normally available in mainstream schools, colleges, from the resources available to them. Okay? And I do think we need to stress on that, the resources available to them. Depending on the size of the school where you're located, the resources that are available will differ, and we've got to recognise that. And then it goes on to say that under the arrangements, local authorities have the responsibility for pulling this local offer together, working with children, parent, young people, families and schools and colleges to develop the local offer and build on success. So let's start from the perspective of not saying what we're not doing, but actually what are we doing already and we're doing well. So that's just to contextualise where this training fits in to the world we're moving into and why the local offer, there is so much emphasis being placed on this. Any questions at this point? In the other trainings there's been a bit of a mixed reaction. Some people actually had quite a lot of information about the local offer, and for some this was the first time they'd actually come across it. How are we feeling in the room today?
Anita, can I just add, there are some confederations and partnerships that are working collaboratively on this agenda. So there's especially smaller groups of schools where they've got a cluster of schools in that locality, it seems to best fit their model that they share and respond to this opportunity together and work on it together. So thinking about each of your different networks and partnerships, it is something that you might need to speak and relate to when you go back and speak as a community in that point of view as well.
Have you had many conversations around the local offer?
health, the usual, how are we going to get health and all the others, you know,
On board.
it's okay saying that what education we're going to do, but we constantly have difficulties, social services,
Yeah.
health.
And so the questions around health, social services and other, how do we access them? There is a statutory obligation for them to be part of the local office and state that core. There are some challenges around this, there is no doubt. It's not going to be easy and overnight, okay? Because we're working with 3 different systems, trying to bring them together into an integrated approach. However, I think there is enough political will to do this. I'm actually quite encouraged by some of what's going on in special needs. We needed an overhaul of the Code of Practice. There was no doubt the Code of Practice is out of date. And the new one that's coming out has been written collectively by the DFE, Department of Health, the Ministry of Justice, or Department of Justice, and BIS. Okay? So 4 departments have all come together to actually put that code together. So there's been a cross department input. Speech, language and communication is a national issue. Right? It is a national issue. It is the highest disability amongst all children and young people. We're looking around 10% of all children and young people have speech and language communication needs. And yeah, I'm actually equally surprised at how many schools do not access materials and resources that are out there on the Communication Trust website. There are lots and lots of resources out there. If you look at the Communication Trust website, there's an online tool to assess staff skills and abilities in this area. There are lots of posters, there are developmental charts. You can do a lot in-house before you actually bring in the specialists. And I do think we need to start thinking about how do we capacity build within that. If you look at Young Minds is a national organisation, but they do a lot on the emotional well-being and mental health issues for young people. Again, a number of resources out there. I'm not saying that every case will be met by this, but certainly in one authority where we had an overflow going to OT and physio, they were being inundated with requests. And one of the things was that these requests were not being filtered, so actually they were over capacity. We spent a lot of time capacity building in schools, and schools started taking on and delivering some programs themselves. What that did was actually discern which were the most acute cases that needed to go to OT and physio, and which could actually be met through provision in school. So for example, things that, and we used an evidence-based approach, so things like right dance. Does anyone use right dance? There is ample evidence to demonstrate how that supports not only the development of gross motor skills, but also fine motor skills and handwriting. 3 to 5 minutes daily on a regular basis has proved over and over again the impact it can have in that area. So it kind of helps as an intervention, okay, as opposed to always making those referrals. But it is about using things that have been researched and evidence-based. I think the days of when we kind of just go into education shows and people show us, oh, I've got this resource. We need to start asking those questions. What's the research behind this? And I think, again, Pupil Premium has done that for us. I was at one of the education shows last year, and I was actually going around and asking some suppliers, where's the research behind what you've done? How much have you invested in researching this? And the ones who hadn't, I wouldn't even look at. And I know that sounds pretty cut and dry, and maybe it's where I'm at, but I think if I was in school right now, I would still do the same. We've got to start thinking about how we use research to justify buying in an intervention or using an intervention, rather than just going with, that looks nice, or that might work. What is the basis of it? Okay. So the local offer, something that we all have a responsibility towards. And just to re-embed, special education needs is additional and different from. So before we get to that point, it is critical that we define our baseline. The waves of provision, this is not new. I think many of you will recognise it. In 2004, the DCSF came out with a fantastic publication called Enjoyment and Excellence. I have to say, I think one of their best publications. Kids can come to school to enjoy themselves. Teachers can come to school to enjoy themselves. It's okay. And through that, we will achieve excellence. And I think sometimes we've forgotten those messages. But within that, they talked about the waves. They talked about the waves of provision. And the largest baseline, Okay, so do not look at the basic local. The basic wave 1, quality first, what we offer every child in our school, okay, at wave 1 provision. Whose responsibility is that wave 1? Okay. Every teacher is a teacher of special educational needs. Every teacher is responsible for that wave 1. And within that will be differentiation. Within that will be purposeful seating. Within that will be things like keywords. Yeah, keywords list. And so, if you have a colleague who comes and says to you as a SENCO, I have concerns about this child. Okay. What would be the first conversation we could then have if we could define that wave 1?
What provision strategies have you put in place already for the student?
Right, so let's look at our wave 1, our whole school wave 1. What are you doing already? What do you know works and what's not working? And it might be that they turn around and say, well actually, they just don't get the vocabulary. Well okay, so let's look at keywords. How many do you think they can take? Well, I only think they can take 3 words. Well, what's the 3 top words they need for this topic? Let's get it down to that. Let's try that for 6 weeks and let's have a conversation in 6 weeks' time. We can start having those open, challenging conversations with colleagues in a non-threatening way. We can start encouraging them to try different things at wave 1 before they need to move on to other areas. And it makes it safe. If everyone's been involved in defining wave 1, and it's not just been the senior leadership team who said, this is our wave 1, they've all signed up to it. We can use wave 1 to monitor. So those who, the senior leadership team, we can use it as a monitor. You can turn it into a monitoring grid. Guaranteed, when staff will define wave 1, it will replicate key points of the Ofsted framework. I would be very surprised if they are polar apart. There will be similarities. But if staff themselves have defined that wave 1, and you then say we're going to use it as a monitoring tool, do you think they'll be more likely to buy in to that process? Do you think they'll be more likely to work with you on that? You're doing learning walks around the school because you've got concerns about the learning environment. How can we use wave 1 to look at that and monitor that? So that wave 1, once it's defined, can be used in a number of ways. Again, if I was back in school, I would be using it. If a supply teacher was walking through the door at 8:15, I would give them my wave 1 and say, this is what we expect every member of staff to do. It's a quick way for them, one piece of paper, to see what does the teaching and learning policy look like in practice. If I had NQTs or training teachers coming through the door, again, this is our wave 1, this is what we expect of all staff. I would share it with parents, and I would also use it as part of recruitment. If I was advertising any posts, why don't we include the wave 1? This is what we expect all our staff to do. Because if someone applying isn't able to deliver that, actually you're doing the shortlisting at their end rather than our end. So that wave 1, once it's put together, and we'll talk about how we can do that and how we can involve staff and governors and children in defining that, can become quite a useful and powerful tool in a number of contexts. Okay, wave 2. Wave 2. Wave 2 is the short-term interventions, okay, which is additional and different from your wave 1. Short-term, we're looking 6 to 12 weeks, okay, and they should, depending on how you deliver them and you collect data, they should help to also define and support your understanding of the difference between interventions that help to distinguish a gap in learning, those that are for low attainment, those that are for developmental delay, and those that support a special educational need. 4 very different needs, okay, and 4 different approaches that we need to support those needs. If you were to go back to school, and again as part of the drip process for the next year, 10 minutes in a staff room, in a staff meeting, you were to have a discussion with colleagues. What's the difference between low attainment, developmental delay, gap in learning and special educational need? What kind of comments do you think you'll get back?
Yeah, I think it started to be positive. They could identify the children.
They could identify good stuff. Okay, anyone else?
I think we might have questions about how do I differentiate that? How do I find out which category this people fits into?
Yeah.
Because they might belong to more than one actually.
They might belong to more than one. And Very often though, when a colleague comes and says, I've got concerns about a child or a young person, where does that normally stem from? What's been the basis of them usually saying it?
I don't know where to go next with this child.
Sometimes it's that they don't know where to go next, but why? What have they hit? What has been that taken them to that point?
They've hit a barrier because the attainment's been low, the child hasn't been producing the level.
So it's 9 times out of 10 based around attainment. So this idea is they're not attaining a certain level. So quite often, are they actually discerning between low attainment, a gap in learning, special education needs, and 2010, Ofsted did a report and a research around it. It was called A Statement Is Not Enough. It talks about the over and misidentification of special educational needs. Where I've worked with schools that have been in a category, 9 times out of 10, again, when you go through their SEN register, we end up pruning it down quite significantly because a number of children who are placed on the register are there because of low attainment, not because they have a special educational need. So I think there is a dialogue to be had with colleagues around how we understand this. When I was SENCO, if a member of staff came to me and said, I have a concern about this child, okay, not only would we have a wave 1 conversation, I had a 1-pager which I would give to them and say, right, tell me what you've done, tell me where your concerns are, what have you assessed so far, and what do you think the need is? And it really helped them to become reflective practitioners around looking at, do they really understand that child's need? I don't think we've got it to the point where they were actually at the point where they could say to me, this is a gap in learning. But as we develop in that knowledge and we deliver interventions, we become clearer on that, actually, and we do need to use the data to support that. The interventions you deliver for someone who's got developmental delay compared to there's a gap in learning is quite different. And the expected outcomes that you want from that intervention are quite different. So how we would design the interventions would differ. I'm not saying it's an accurate science at this point in time, but I do think we need to start having those conversations. And I think it would help our profession as a whole to be able to start thinking about it. And then we'll move to wave 3. So, sorry, coming back to wave 2, whose responsibility is that? Wave 1 is, whose responsibility? Everybody's. Wave 2, whose responsibility? Class teachers? Yeah, phase leaders possibly, depending on how big a size school. And in a secondary context, heads of department? Because if it's a gap in learning, or it's something specific to the subject, who's best placed in a secondary context to know that? The heads of department, the subject specialists. So, then we move to wave 3, which is long-term, highly individualised support, which is an ongoing process. Whose responsibility then is that? SENCO. Now the SENCO is supporting wave 1 and wave 2, but actually just focused on wave 3. So those of you who are SENCOs in the room, do you think that would make a shift in your time or workloads? Yeah. Oh yes! How many times do we spend chasing our tail because we're sorting out wave 1 issues and wave 2 issues? And the actual paperwork at wave 3 is intensive. We know that. We've got to collect a lot of evidence for wave 3. But because we're looking at a much more long-term need, and that's required. So if SENCOs are then just focusing on wave 3, and the rest of the school is supporting them with wave 1 and wave 2, and they're supporting the school, do you think that changes the dynamic and dialogue in the school? Okay, mixed reaction there. Some of you are looking at me thinking, wow, this is great. And some of you are thinking, is it doable? Is it possible? What do we think? Is it possible? Do you think if we started to bring about this culture? Yes?
I really like this, and particularly the way to you were talking about, because I think that quite a lot of teachers and parents, what often when a child isn't doing well, instantly want to look at special need, or they've got dyslexia, they've got ADHD, and actually it could just be the fact that the class teacher hasn't closed down anything they're learning. And there is this kind of, and I think teachers will be guilty of it as well, and parents, but just when you think, oh, it's not to me or my child, sometimes it's just
Yeah. And if you listen to Michael Gove's speech at Policy Exchange on the 5th of September, he talked about the research behind one poor teaching for 1 year in primary, the impact it has. Okay, so we've got data out there to show the impact it can have. But actually, this makes the conversations much more healthier around what can be done as opposed to what's not being done. And I really strongly believe, I cannot advocate this enough, defining wave one makes it so explicit of what the baseline is, and this is what we expect every teacher to do. There is no two ways about it. Yes?
The biggest issue is
You're going to have to talk a little bit louder, sorry.
the
So I've got
teachers have to do it with the greatest respect. You know, that initial teacher training is appalling in terms of being able to distinguish wave two.
Yeah.
So a lot of the SENCOs job is about teaching, empowering the teachers. Unless there's a whole school buy-in
Yes.
to that,
Yes.
teacher training, the teachers on the line to nothing.
Absolutely, and hence we've suggested this be a senior leader and a SENCO. This is not going to happen overnight. It's a cultural change. We're looking, you look at 3 years to embed a vision. I hear what you're saying about initial teacher training, but one of the things that is stressed quite a lot at initial teacher training is reflective practice, and then becoming that reflective practitioner. And if we can carry that on within our school context, and when they come up with issues, reflect it back and say, well, actually, let's look at wave one in this. Let's have that conversation. It's no longer about the SENCO doing, or I think the word you used, was it empowering? Is that the word? Actually, it's about coaching and facilitating. And it changes the style of leadership. It changes the style of your management. And you can coach once or twice, but coaching is about bringing it out from within them rather than giving it to them. So I think it begins that shift. But this journey is not going to happen overnight. You can go back to your schools and start the conversation and drip, drip, drip feed. Expect at least a 3-year turnaround. It's going to take some time. But have a vision of what you want and the culture you want within your school. And as a SENCO, where do you want to focus your time? How do you want to focus your time? That capacity builds within the school. That gets every teacher thinking, every teacher in this school is a teacher of special educational needs. And you can start by using those sentences, start by dripping those in. As SENCO, I would have 10 minutes on every staff meeting in primary context. Okay? In a secondary context, are there opportunities when departments meet to have SEN on every agenda? 10 minutes, how can we keep updating? SEN board in the staff room. How can we drip, drip feed and build in that culture of shift and change? Yeah. So I do hear what you're saying, but I do think it's also a process. Any other thoughts on this?
Can I say it's a whole school philosophy and not just about the teachers, because if you don't interpret that for every member of staff, you do get a different set of values sometimes being delivered in the school.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a whole school. And wave one, technically you should involve the governors, you should involve children, and we'll talk about that. Okay, it's about the education healthcare plan will come together through a co-productive dialogue. Parents, families, schools will sit down together and talk about what are the outcomes, what are the aspirations, what is the needs. Based on that, funding will be agreed, and based on that, appropriate provision and what will be expected from that. So the parents will have some choice around the decision making of that budget, but actually they do need to work within a framework. It's not going to be a free rein out there. And in some cases, and some examples we've seen nationally, it has been taken up. Some parents have said it's too much, I don't want to get involved. Some have said, I'll give it a go, and then found it too much. It's a mixed bag out there. But the one thing that is becoming more and more clear is the transparency around costs and the transparency of having those conversations. I just want to share 2 examples. You may have heard this before, but a mother who's a part of the trial in another part of the country has 2 children with ASD, 2 primary age children with ASD, and holidays, i.e. non-term time, was a challenge for this mother. She wanted respite. And so they all had a multi-professional meeting. The professionals were thinking, well, we can get 2 play workers in twice a week to take care of one of the child, and then the other one can stay with the mother, and that will give her a bit of respite. And the mum's sitting in this meeting thinking, well, actually, if I've got the other child and I still have to do the shopping, and that's not respite, quite frankly. So she was getting quite upset, as you can imagine. So they took her aside and said, okay, so what does it mean for you? She said, what does a respite mean for you? And she quite clearly, just buy me a trampoline and put it in my back garden. I can send the kids out any time I need and have some time for myself. Think of the cost of having 2 play workers twice a week through their educational career, and think of the cost of a trampoline in their back garden. Those are the kinds of conversations we need to start having. Pragmatic, realistic, open conversations. I think there's another example that's been shared as well of a mother whose child needed certain bandages on a regular basis. And the mother felt, well, my child is, precious and unique, and I'll use the bandage and throw it away every day. And the medical professionals were trying to get the mother to reuse the bandages and wash them and reuse them because they were very expensive. Just by sharing the cost of the bandages with the mum, it made her realise that they can be washed and reused, and they don't always need to be thrown away. I know these are small things, but I don't think sometimes parents realise the cost of when intervention is put in place. If you think about a teaching assistant who takes a phonics group, for an hour a day for 6 weeks, that's 30 hours, what is the cost of that? And if we start beginning to be open about some of this, that doesn't mean we're disclosing people's salaries, that doesn't mean that we're actually making that kind of information, but what we are making clear to parents is we are aware that there are costs, and this is what we're investing in your child. Because I think sometimes they believe or think that we're not. Yeah? So we've got to start thinking how we do that. So where does the new world take us, and what does it look like? In the new world, and it isn't very different from the principles we already put into place, we'll be asking, where is the child and young person at? So that's accurate identification of need. Where do they want to be? What are their aspirations? My experience is most children with special educational needs actually know quite early on where their limitations are, but they also know where they want to go and what they think they can achieve. And I sometimes wonder, do we have those conversations with them? I remember a Year 5 lad in particular, he really struggled with learning, really struggled. I mean, he had some really serious learning issues, but his life aspiration for his future employability was he wanted to be a zookeeper. That's what he felt he was going to contribute in the future. It wasn't a wild aspiration. He'd really thought some of this through, and you sat down and talked to him about why a zookeeper and what that would involve and how he would tell the time to feed all the animals. He knew the skills he needed. He had really thought it through. And all it took for us was to shift the curriculum to build everything around him and his journey to becoming a zookeeper. And his engagement level shifted. There were still some challenges, and we had to deal with those. But actually, he was now seeing a purpose to why he was in the classroom. Whereas actually, a lot of the time, he just couldn't relate. How does I want to be this? How does what you're teaching me relate to where I want to go? So we need to start having those conversations, and particularly I'd say to primary colleagues, how often do we think that actually in our classrooms we've got a future doctor sitting there, a future Prime Minister, a future scientist, and let's start thinking around building in those aspirations. What works? So an evidence-based approach that enables children and young people to make progress. What works generically, what works specifically for this young person? I would say we do that a lot already. That's good practice. We identify what's really working, and we share that information as part of transition. What additionally or otherwise will help them to be where they need to be? So evidence to demonstrate short-term provision as well as any additional needs. Now, as I said, this work is not new, and it does build on things that have been happening for the last 2 years. Again, the Ofsted report, Statement's Not Enough, and the Ofsted framework. So this isn't just about the change in special educational need that's coming on the horizon. This has been building up strategically and nationally for a number of years.